So yeah, hot or not, hack away. So last week I had this epiphany, which basically information security is like Monkey Island for anybody that's played any of those like old school Lucasfilm or LucasArts point and click adventure games, where basically the solution to the game is to rub everything against everything else to find the solution. And I was like, holy shit, that's exactly what we do in InfoSec. We just like take everything and rub it against, oh look, shells, right? So I thought, oh my God. So short bio, my name's Dan, I'm Vis on Twitter. I'm a co-founder of a small company called Carbon Dynamics. We do like red team pen test stuff. I did 10 years as a sysadmin, architect person, and then rage quit out to InfoSec. I've been doing InfoSec for like 8 years. I've done some talks, I've gotten some press, but you guys aren't here for me, you're here for this thing. So we'll get to it, right? So who didn't think that was cool? Like who hasn't seen Predator, right? Everybody saw this in the 80s and was like, that's fucking awesome, right? So, you know, you go and you look and its barrier to entry is like 30 grand. Like, well, you can't really mess around with it, and how do you come up with 30 grand? And like, this was 3-4 years ago. I'm like, what do you do? So I figured, well, you know, I ran Barcamp San Diego for like 7 years, and part of my duties for running Barcamp was to contact sponsors and basically beg for money. So I tried to put some of that skill to use, and I emailed FLIR, and I said, hey, you know, I'm this no-name random guy in San Diego, and I want to borrow one of your really expensive cameras and do a bunch of security research with it. I want to see how it applies to different things. I have this long list of like 24 tests I want to try. Would you be, would you be kind enough to loan me a camera for the purposes of the research? And a very kind, very friendly lady named Haley responded to me and basically told me, I don't know if you can read, probably can't read that. It basically says, the important part is the second line. Well, we're in discussion on whether or not the camera would be able to see heat from computers. Sorry, Haley. Like, sorry, FLIR tells me that I can't do that. So here's a picture of me doing that with FLIR, right? So great, good job. So how do you do that? Well, that's kind of cool. In November of 2013, this guy, I think his name was Mike, did this article where he's an EV blog guy, so his whole thing is like oscilloscopes and hardware stuff. Like him and Mike Osmond probably get along really well. And he bought one of these things and he took it apart and he realized it's just a tiny little embedded Windows CE device. And they took it apart and they did a whole bunch of hacking to it, and they found out that it's got a whole bunch of horrifically bad security, and FLIR basically phoned it in. Not to say that, you know, a device like this really needs a lot of security, because outside of the photos that are on it, there's not really a lot of sensitive stuff there. But it was an interesting thing to be sure. So I read about it, and then on EEV blog, like 400 or something, 500 pages into the single thread on this device was a guy had basically figured out that, hey, they use the same sensor on this model as they do in the $8,000 model. That, like, really? Do they now? So I had to have one, right? So essentially, yeah, a bunch of EE nerds like showed up the InfoSec community, like a bunch of EE nerds that, and I say that lightly, right? I'm friends with a lot of these guys, but they don't have any background in security. Their objective here was not to like break things and get shells and like circumvent security controls. They were just playing around. So props to these guys. However, this is how I imagine what FLIR was doing, because the first hack was basically editing a text file. You download, like you plug this thing in via USB and it gives you an FTP interface. Like hilariously, you can FTP into it. And once you FTP in, it's a Windows environment. And you FTP in, you pull off one config file, you change some text in the config file. Like literally, you change E4, which is this model number, to E8, which is the fancy model number, and send the text file back to the thing, pull the battery out, put the battery back in, and now you have 16 times the resolution. So I have screenshots of that in a minute, but basically, the hack was changing a text file. And the sensor they use in this, it was the same sensor they use in the E8, which is 320 by 240, and this is advertised to be an 80 by 60 sensor. So it's gone back and forth since. FLIR found out that the EEV blog people had hacked the device, and they went and got all the stock and inventory out on shelves in brick and mortar stores back. They had them ship it all back to Sweden, or I guess wherever FLIR is, to be retrofitted with new firmware. So they reflashed it to try and make it more secure. And the way that they tried to make it more secure was to take that one text file that has the config in it and CRC it against the serial number of the device. And that didn't take them long to figure out. They figured out the text file just needed to be tweaked a little bit to be a certain file size and to have a certain CRC. And then somebody put a Python script on the forum to do that, to fix it. And that's when I jumped in. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Re-CRC it, bam, unlocked, happy. And since then, it's gotten a little bit more complex, but it's really obvious that FLIR is kind of phoning it in. They're just adding these tiny thin layers of, like, I guess you could call it security. Like the next fix that they tried to do was to try and obfuscate the config file so that it wasn't plain text anymore, and it was like encoded in some way, and they just found a way to decode it. It wasn't even encrypted. It was like straight up, not quite base 64, but it was not readable text. So to the best of my ability to guess, I'm like, FLIR is not a poor company. If you go back and look at these like screenshots of like the stuff that goes on eBay, like that's $100,000 for a single thing, right? So they're making 100 grand off of one piece of equipment. Like they're not poor. They don't have to phone it in if they don't want, right? So my guess is they're just stalling for some reason. So needless to say, when I got my hands on it, it was basically this. I mean, a little bit more walking than that. But yeah, it was basically me walking around everything, carrying this thing everywhere for 2 months, just pointing it at all sorts of stuff. I do find it very hilarious that it was crippled in software, though. So that was like, yay for FLIR for crippling it in software instead of like doing it properly. But yeah, basically just brought it everywhere and pointed it at everything for a while. So the first finding of note was like the difference between 80 by 60 and 320 by 240. Like I changed the resolution here a little bit. Hopefully it's not affecting it too much, but like it should be a very egregiously obvious difference in resolution between 80 by 60 and 320 by 240, because mathematically it's a 16 times more resolution. So the second finding of note was that there's a lot of extra modes that get set up on the thing, and this mode in particular is a mode that detects condensation. So this is a glass of beer, and the green section of the photo is anything that's below 48.7 degrees, which I guess is some temperature that they've figured out. That's when hard surfaces condense. So essentially what you get when you hack this device is you get a new menuing system, some extra modes, 16 times resolution. There's some extra stuff in there I'll get to later that that you don't have. Like they use the same PCB in this as in the E8, but on the E8 they have like you get Wi-Fi and you get some other stuff. This one can't do video and the other one can, things like that. So TLDR on that is this one costs $1,000, the other one costs $8,000. So buy this one and hack it instead of paying $8,000 for the big one. So anyway, on to the meat, right? So the first thing I decided was these are some of the items from the list that I submitted to FLIR when I wrote them in 2010 and said, hey, I want to do a bunch of these things. And a lot of it was, can you detect if somebody's been messing with a lock? Can you see if somebody's injecting packets into wireless, which is kind of moot at this point because who uses WEP, right? Like all the attacks now don't deal with spamming packets much. Like here's a great example. So this is my gaming rig. Like which one is doing the evil? Like you can't really tell, right? So you're looking at these two pictures and you're like, well, the one on the right is obviously brighter. That means it's obviously hotter, and you can tell by the temperature indicators on the right-hand side of both frames that, yeah, one's several degrees hotter than the other, and there's a little bit of change there. But you can't tell if I'm just playing games or hacking something or cracking passwords or what. You'd have to take a baseline for every device, and if you have to do that, it sort of defeats the purpose of using it as a forensics tool, right? Same kind of thing. It's like, oh, that's kind of neat, but it's kind of disappointing, right? So here's a Raspberry Pi. It's a Raspberry Pi. Like, that's it. You can't tell what it's doing. The temperature stays the same no matter what the load is. Like, fucking great. Thanks. Appreciate that. Another thing I'll get to a little bit later in the talk is there are people that have made like lens attachments that you can attach into the thing. Like they 3D printed a bezel that goes in here into the front. And you can buy zinc selenium, I think, lenses and stick them in there to turn it into a macro lens so you can see up close and do PCB work. I thought the same thing with lockpicking. So like, here's this really fickle master lock that I have that usually takes me 15 minutes to get through on average because it's like 6 pin and all pins are spool pins, so it's kind of a pain in the ass to get through. So once I got the lock open, I took it and I just put it down on the couch next to me and said, oh, I should take a picture. And so that's what a lock looks like after you've been picking at it. So it's obviously warm, but that's all you can tell. And under normal circumstances, a lock would never be warm like that unless somebody was holding it. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but if you're gonna bump a lock or if you're gonna pick a lock and the lock doesn't take 15 minutes to get through, like you're not gonna see any of this. You can't forensificate locks with a FLIR gun. It's just no. Then my Alpha, my 2-watt ABGN Alpha that the brand everyone uses to do like Wi-Fi hacksery. Again, it looks cool, but you can't really tell what's going on. I even have like a 24. You can barely see it. Like I have a 24 dBi Yagi. It's like this big, and I'm pointing it out the window. It's sitting on a baker's rack, and I have it like spamming packets. I had it attached to some random network just to start hemorrhaging the ARP spoof traffic that you normally see when you do like web cracking with aircrack, just to see if exacerbating the interface and trying to get electrons out the front would change the temperature. I let this thing go for like 6 hours, nothing. So here I am, I guess. I'm like, God damn it, right? I came up with this huge list of all this cool stuff that you should be able to do, and like, what can you? So I kind of gave up, right? And I stopped considering it as a security tool, but I still carried it around and pointed at stuff because it's just a fun toy. You just turn it on and hand it to people and watch them go, whoa, right? So some surprises, I started taking it to the client at which I'm stationed at the moment. We're doing like this big pen test remediation thing at this client, this big fancy office building, and I'm pointing it at like security systems and the walls and cameras and doors and stuff, and I'm going, hey, wait a minute. This is actually more interesting than the stuff I was considering it for originally, right? So as it turns out, this thing is like gold for red team. Like this isn't, I'll get into it, but I'm trying to contain my excitement. This is a really awesome toy if you're a red team person. So you're doing physical security assessments. This thing is awesome. So like first and foremost, cameras. The cool thing about cameras from the business, for anybody that's familiar with the stuff that I've done in the past, was like going and attacking cameras on the internet. This is the business end of the camera this time, not like the internet, like the admin section that isn't supposed to be on the internet side of the camera. So these things stick out like a sore thumb. Like they look like that when you point it at the ceiling. You're like, oh look, there's a camera. Look, there's another camera. So the cool thing about here is, you can differentiate them from fake ones because the real ones have power going to them. And all the transistors and resistors and those boards generate heat, and they do that. So these things have been sitting in one place on for months or weeks or whatever, and pretty neat stuff, right? So I went around and took lots of pictures of them, and they're really obvious. And like this is like, I think all of these were, the top two and the one on the bottom left were all indoors at a movie theater in San Diego, and the one on the right on the bottom is an outdoor dome camera. So you can really, really tell, like, camera. It's really obvious, right? So here's another screenshot. Like, it's the one from the bottom left on the last slide. They put an access point, Cisco access point right next to the camera. And I'm looking at that through the FLIR going, wait a minute. Hold on. You're going to tell me that the access point is on the same network as the camera? Right? So I think back to last year I found 970,000 publicly addressable cameras, and I was told by Liam, the Bro IDS guy who was here earlier, that there should be well over that number, and I was going to try and go break 1 million, but yeah, same thing. Like, oh, this ties into other research. So same thing for the outside mounted cameras. Like this is outside of the building in the same mall. You can see these are 2 mounted cameras that are pointed different directions. Like one's towards the parking lot, one's out towards like the quad in the mall. They stick out like sore thumbs. It's super easy to see, especially against the sky in the background, because you can see on the temperature scale, like if it's overcast and it's night, you're going to see the temperature of the clouds, and the clouds where they were 43 degrees. So even if the camera's sitting at 60 degrees, which is still not super warm, the diff, like this thing will see half a degree in difference, and it'll register it. So it's super easy to see cameras that stick out that are legit. Cars are a really interesting thing because they totally don't behave like you think that they would. Like obviously the car has an engine compartment with an engine in it normally, and that engine generates heat normally, and that heat takes forever to dissipate. Like you'll go out and point at a car and you'll see the hood of the car and the whole front end of the car will still be warmed 6 hours after it's been parked. So like the one on the bottom right here was driving. Like I actually caught that car as it was driving. And in some cases, the scale, you can take a picture before it adjusts itself because it's sort of auto, I'll show you guys in a minute, but like it auto regulates itself in terms of scale and color. If you catch it too quickly, you'll have like the same thing with a camera where it'll blow out the stuff that's too bright. So like in this frame, you can see on the very far left, you can see a camera that still has its exhaust and brakes are still warm, which means it was just parked recently. And then you have other cars that their exhaust and brakes are not warm, but there's still a huge bright area underneath the car, which would either mean something on the bottom side of the car is causing the pavement to become warm, or that it's, and this is, I guess this is the cleanest thing that I could come up with, was that the car acts as an insulator. So once you park a car during the day and then the sun goes down, the car will insulate the pavement, and you can tell how long the car has been there based on the surrounding environment of the temperature of the asphalt. So if the asphalt under the car is still hot, it's been there since before the sun went down, which is really interesting, right? And then this other frame, that's a car that's been there for I don't know how many hours, but the rest of the car is, ambient temperature. That car has probably been there 6-7 hours, and it's still like the radiator is still squirting heat out everywhere, so it's pretty neat. Here's a fun one. We start getting into the really interesting stuff. Like this is the back of my Note 3. Can anybody, like, feel free to shout, point and stuff. Like, is there anything interesting that you can point out at the back of this phone? Anybody? Yeah, well, sort of. So the big red rectangle towards the bottom, that's the battery, which means the battery is warm enough to be seen through the back lid of the phone, which means either the phone is consuming a lot of power for some reason, and the power consumption is causing the battery to get warm. The other thing that you can see is that there's a little shape on the key, and that shape is actually a handcuff shim. It's a Cerapic handcuff shim I used to keep in my phone. And one of the other modes you can do is called high contrast, and you turn the high contrast on, and the slight differentiation between the degrees in temperature here you can see it even better there. And basically, this was that's what it looks like. So it's a handcuff shim that's in the back of my phone, and the shim is touching the battery. It's conducting heat from the battery, and then, like a diffuser, putting it onto the plastic surface of the back of the phone, when the plastic surface acts as an insulator. So it's like a series of lenses, except with plastic, which is kind of a weird thing to consider. So if anybody, is anybody familiar with the FLIR E4, that new iPhone attachment? Everybody heard of that thing? So recently some guy posted a video to YouTube, like flipping his shit about how you can steal people's PINs and you can capture people's financial information with this FLIR E4. And I had a barrage of people on Twitter messaging me saying, Vis, look what this guy did. I'm like, he's high, so he drank too many paint. No, you can't. So this is a screenshot during that same outing where I got all the cameras. I walked up to the ATM 5 seconds after somebody finished using it. I took a picture of the pin pad, and I can't tell that there's any buttons. I can't see anything. If you guys can see something rad, your eyes are better than mine, but I can't. That tells me nothing. So there's this whole concept now that FLIR is becoming super available to people, and they can buy it. Like the FLIR E4 device is $300 or something, and this guy's $1,000. So it's like within the realm of normal people that don't have $30,000 to spend on a fun toy to buy these things and play with them, to try and capture financial information and try and capture stuff from pin pads and other places you can type in numbers like security doors and things like that. And it's with pins, and specifically like on ATMs, you can't. It doesn't work. The buttons aren't the right texture. They're not the right plastic or rubber. Most ATM pin pads are either a very hard enameled plastic, or they're metal, and you can't really see anything. And with the other pin pad, the one up in the top left from the screenshot, it's one of those like rubberized ones you see at the grocery store, or like the kind that they bring to you like when you're out to eat. And if you're gonna point a camera at one of those things, it's not gonna matter whether it's FLIR or not, because the only way you're gonna capture any information is to like look over the shoulder of the waiter with the camera, which defeats the whole purpose of doing the thing in the first place. So I kind of like, some of these people need a bit of a slap, right? So they get excitable, sure, I can relate, I get excitable too, but just no. However, the really interesting thing that I noticed was you can see footprints in carpet, like here. Like, you can trail people through hallways and through lobbies and through places that are carpeted based on footprints, and the footprints stay for like 10 to 20 seconds, depending on the temperature of the room, the temperature of the bottom of the person's foot, and the density of the carpet. And the longest I've seen is you can get about 20, 30 seconds of hang time from somebody's footprint. So you can trail somebody, like if you're doing a red team assessment, you need to follow somebody, you can follow them through a hallway or a room for up to 30 seconds without ever actually seeing them. You can just follow the footprints. It's pretty neat. So like here's another one, right? So the footprints stick around for a while. I think this was DEF CON. It's pretty neat. It doesn't work on concrete. It doesn't work on tile or metal floors or anything like that. But predominantly concrete, or I'm sorry, carpet. Carpeted floors. Interesting stuff. This is an HID badge reader, like for proximity cards. When I took this picture, I thought it would be really cool to do the same examination with a badge reader that's fake. Or one that's been planted for purposes of capturing RFID information. I don't have that hardware, unfortunately, but I think it'd be a really fun test. So if you know anybody that would be willing to like let me borrow some, like that'd be cool. I'd take some pictures. Other things you can do with this is in some cases, attackers will put skimmers on top of these readers to capture HID card information. And I believe that the actual HID reader will be emitting more power than the skimmer, because the skimmer just needs to listen, because this thing is generating the field and not the skimmer. So if you put a skimmer over this thing, I have a suspicion that this thing's thermal readout would, or like its image would go a lot colder, right? Physical security wise, like if you're looking at this thing and you realize there's a lot of heat coming from behind this door, like maybe it's a server room, maybe it's a punch down closet, maybe it's not supposed to be a server room, but it really is. Maybe it's a room where, and I think that was the case here, where there's the audio-visual department of an organization tends to work, and they have like 4 huge 60-inch televisions that are eavesdropping on a multitude of meetings that are going on in the company. And that would be a really fun room to like lockpick into if you're doing a red team assessment, to sit and, hey, look, there's 4 displays plugged into all the places where the board members have their meetings about what they're going to do with stock and insider trading much, right? So that's pretty cool. Another one that I noticed was that occasionally you'll see the bezel of a door, of a glass door, lit up like this. And it looks like it's gold. It's not actually gold. This is just, it's really warm. And why would that be? So as it turns out, if you look at it from the side, only one side is hot. And that's even more interesting, because then you have to think, okay, well, why is only one side warm? That's bizarre. So this door is an access door that gets you to the elevators in this building. And that warm side is electrified because it's magnetically controlled. It's an electronic door where you swipe your badge against the reader, and then the door clicks and you can open the door. But from the other side of the door, the office side of the door, it's not secured, so you can just walk in. Which also, there's, it's vulnerable to the whole, stick a piece of paper on a coat hanger under the door because there's an inch of space, and just wave it around until the motion sensor notices it and the door will open. But you can tell from a distance, again, if you're doing an assessment, you can tell from a distance what you're dealing with based on the temperature of the bezel of the door. I thought was pretty cool. Here's another fun one for any Mac people in the audience. If your Mac generates a lot of heat, you'll notice that when you pick it up off the desk, a lot of times if you put your hand where your laptop just was, that space is really warm. So you can do the same thing with the FLIR gun, except it's a lot more visual, obviously. You can walk up to a desk and you can tell how long somebody's been there or how long somebody's been gone. So if somebody picks up their laptop and walks away, the heat signature stays on the desk and all the vent exhaust, and you can tell like the little connector there on the left side of the frame is still warm. That's probably, my guess is that's the first thing that'll cool off, because it's small and plastic. So you can tell how long somebody's been away from their desk with their, so there you go. You have a little bit of an intel there based on what people have done. This is a 3G or 4G USB cell dongle. They generate a lot of heat because they have radios in them, and the radios are, like when your phone gets hot, it's the same concept, except it's a USB stick. I thought this was an interesting finding, though I have yet to have a real practical use for how to measure something using it. Maybe in cases like other pieces of security research I've done involve devices that are connected to the internet that shouldn't be, like signs of various kinds and Scada devices and all sorts of stuff that way. And those things tend to be connected to the internet by way of typically Verizon hockey pucks or USB modems like this. So if you can potentially find, if you're trying to find how something is connected to the internet and you know where its gear lives, if its gear is warm, it could be one of these. This is a fun game to play, is where's that guy keep his cell phone? So it's a little obvious there, but you can, anything that generates a lot of heat that, you know, you can see through other objects. So in this case, this would be, you know, you can tell maybe what make and model the phone is depending on its size and shape, or how often it's been used or what's going on. So in a lot of cases, you'll have like a guy war driving or a guy doing like a port scan or a security audit with his phone, and it's in his pocket and it's super warm. So if you're doing incident response and you know that the device that's connecting to the network is a phone, and you know where it is physically, that's one way that you can find it. It's probably a little fringe, but you know, it's more ways to use a fun toy. So at the Scada Village at DEF CON this year, it turns out Scada is actually kind of warm. The big thing is obviously television, but those 3 devices on the bottom there are Scada equipment, and they're controlling a panel, which you can't really see because you can't see paint or anything like that with thermal. But it turns out Scada runs pretty warm, and Scada is essentially, like, the easiest way to think of it is it's basically a really buff Raspberry Pi or a small, you know, embedded computer. But they do deal with a lot of power, and a lot of them are essentially like relays and switching relays. So you can spot those things pretty quickly. Here's a closer view of the same devices, right? So now for something completely different. There's a lot of stuff that you can use this device for that isn't directly security related that I found out while I was walking around pointing it at everything. You can get readings of how well cooling equipment is working. For example, this was me turning a can of air duster upside down and spraying it against the water cooling radiator of my gaming computer, and you can see there it went down to minus 1.7 Fahrenheit in the center, and it actually worked pretty well for about a minute. Coffee is fun to watch because it kind of looks like you're drinking lava. You can see how poorly your exhaust fans in your kitchen work, and you can see that like there's heat coming off the stove and it's spreading along underneath the stove, and the vent fans are supposed to be picking it up. Sunburns, like before they're obvious, if you think you have a sunburn, like you can check and, yep, you actually have a sunburn. Making English muffins, you can tell if the giant, we call it cast iron skillet you're using is heated in the right places. You can tell where your cat used to sit. So I thought this was a fun one. I'm like, what the hell is, oh. So yeah, that's like, find where your cat's sitting and take a picture. It's like, yeah, that's my cat's butt, rad. The latest craze right now is quad rotors, and they get very, very warm because those batteries will spike to like 30 amps, 100 amps. And when you're piping that kind of power through little, you know, 1/4-inch thick cables or 8-inch thick cables, and you have a short or you have some kind of problem, it sticks out like crazy. In this case, this was a quad that was on the ground that had just started to take off, and in the first few seconds that it had taken off, you can see that the motors and the speed controllers are just bright white. So fun stuff. If you're into quads and you have one that's misbehaving, it's probably not a bad idea to have a look at this. Weird biological differences between guys and girls. This was bizarre, and I have no idea how to explain it. Like the legs on the left were from like friends of mine that are female, and you can like distinctly see veins on their legs, and the one on the right is mine, and it's just like blobs. It's just bizarre, and I don't know what the deal is. Maybe it has something to do with...
Because women have 2 X's on the X, sometimes what the skin is like, it's called chimerism.
Oh, interesting. Science. That's cool.
You also get lipid formation inside the venous tissue or the lipid
Huh, that's neat. So see, I learned something. Another one is you can tell, like you can't really see through clothing, but you can tell like what state the clothing is in. So like on the left, that was me at DEF CON after the goon swim. I went into the pool with my kilt on, and then I got out of the pool, and my kilt I was like flapping it around, so it was really cold. And on the right, a friend of mine came up after we got back inside, and after seeing the FLIR gun, her first question was, can it see through clothing? So yes, kinda. In this case, like she was wearing a padded bra, and that's all I could tell. But no, it can't really see through clothing. This is a really fun one. Can anybody point out what they think that might be? Like, I want you guys to try and guess. This is a good one. Nothing? What? No, it's not pancake. No, it's actually, this is an eight gallon brew kettle, and this is beer brewing. So this is during the boil. The hot fluid comes up from the bottom, hits the top, cools off, and goes back down, and it kind of looks like the surface of the sun. It looks really cool in video, and I really wish this thing took video, but yeah, it looks pretty amazing seeing it live, like burble up to the top and then sink again and come back up. That's really fun. I should probably take video and put that online later. But like, so this is the actual intended purpose of the device. Like the reason that FLIR manufactured this was to go into people's houses and do things like look and see where insulation wasn't working, or where there was water damage, or if stuff was condensing in the wrong places, or if like termites and other like insect infestations will generate heat, and black mold will generate heat and things like that. So like in this case, this was a hot day in San Diego last week or the week before, where a friend of mine took this up into his attic, and while his air conditioning was running, like you can see the top of the air conditioning unit is 107 degrees. The surface of the ceiling that's touching the sun is 134 degrees. So it gives you an idea of what's working and what isn't on really hot days or really cold days, and you're trying to deal with the heating and the cooling. So it's pretty cool. So like I mentioned before, the add-ons you can do, you can go and buy zinc selenide lenses, and you can attach them to the front of the camera. Now, it wasn't designed to do that, so you're going to have to build your own little attachment ring. Like in some cases, like this guy, he used just a piece of cardboard that he cut out, and another person 3D printed a nose for the front of the camera that fits a particular style of lens. And the result is something like this, where you're now focusing on a PCB, and you can tell if a trace is working or not working, or if a chip is, like in this case, it looks like a transistor that's getting really warm. And by the design of the board, it looks like that's what it's supposed to do, so you can tell whether it's supposed to be working or not. Yeah, so I got to give props to the robotroom.com guy. He's the one that took these two pictures. But it's a very interesting device. The people that I've been seeing that use it more predominantly are people that do a lot of electronics engineering. I'm guessing because EEV blog that's what they do. And it's for this exact reason, to do electronics work and to check on traces and to check whether hardware is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So that's pretty much about it.